On the morning of my 30th wedding anniversary, I woke up before my husband and lay in the dark looking at the ceiling, and I tried to think of one single decision I had made for myself in 3 decades. Not a decision about the children, not a decision about the house, or the meals, or the schedule, or the holidays, or what color to paint the living room in 1998. A decision about me, about what I wanted, about who I was when nobody needed anything from me. I lay there for a long time. The sun came up slowly. Gary slept beside me the way he always slept, flat on his back with one arm across his chest like a man in a portrait. I watched the light change on the ceiling, and I could not think of a single thing. My name is Miriam Ellen Forsythe. I was born in 1962 in Columbus, Ohio, the middle child of 5, raised by a father who worked at a steel plant and a mother who ran the household with the precision of a military operation and the warmth of someone who genuinely loved the work. My mother was a beautiful woman who had wanted to be a teacher, and she had been a teacher, briefly, for 2 years before she married my father and the children started coming. She never seemed bitter about it. She made her world out of what she had, and what she had was us, and she tended us the way a gardener tends a plot of land that is entirely hers, with devotion, with skill, with total ownership. I thought that was what women did. I thought that was what love looked like. I did not understand for a very long time that there was a cost. I met Gary Forsythe at Ohio State in the fall of 1981. He was a junior in business. I was a sophomore in English literature, and he sat next to me in a survey course on American history that neither of us particularly wanted to be in, but that both of us needed to fulfill a distribution requirement. He was tall, confident, the kind of man who takes up the right amount of space without taking up too much. He made me laugh on the first day. By November, we were spending every weekend together. By the following spring, I had rearranged my entire life around his schedule without noticing that I had done it. We graduated and got married in the summer of 1984 in a ceremony in Columbus that my mother organized with the same precision she brought to everything. I wore a dress I had chosen in 3 hours on a Saturday afternoon because Gary had wanted to finalize the venue that same weekend and something had to give. I do not think of this as a complaint. I am simply recording it. The dress was white with a lace overlay, and it was lovely, and I wore it for 6 hours, and I have never worn it since, and I do not know where it is now. We moved to Cincinnati, where Gary had taken a position at a management consulting firm. I found a job at a publishing house, small and local, editing manuscripts for academic presses. I loved the work. I was good at it. I had a talent for seeing what a piece of writing was trying to be and helping it become that thing more fully, which is a skill that requires a particular kind of attention, the ability to subordinate your own preferences to serve someone else's vision. And I was, it turned out, exceptionally well-suited for this. I was so well-suited for it, in fact, that I did it in every area of my life without being asked. Our first child, Daniel, was born in 1986. Our second, Claire, in 1988. Our third, Andrew, in 1992. With each child, I reduced my hours at the publishing house, and after Andrew, I stopped going in altogether because the math of childcare and commute and scheduling had become, as Gary put it, impractical. He was right. He was often right about practical things. What he did not say, and what I did not fully see, was that impractical for whom was a question with only one answer in our household, and that answer was always me. I want to be careful here. Gary Forsythe was not a bad man. He was not cruel or violent or unfaithful. He worked hard and came home and was present in the house in the physical sense of the word. He coached Daniel's soccer team for 3 seasons. He fixed things when they broke. He was reliable and steady, and he loved me in the way that some people love, not demonstratively, not with grand gestures or frequent declarations, but with a kind of solid, unspoken assumption that you were part of his life, and therefore he was glad you were there. That kind of love is real. It is simply not, I was learning at 52, enough. What happened over 30 years happened slowly enough that I did not see it the way you see something that happens all at once. It happened the way water shapes stone, not with a single dramatic blow, but with patient, constant, unremarkable repetition. Every morning I made decisions about breakfast, school lunches, pickups and drop-offs, schedules and appointments, and what needed to happen that day and in what order. Every evening I tracked homework and conflicts and moods, and what was in the refrigerator, and whether anyone had a doctor's appointment, and what Gary needed for his early morning meetings. I was the memory of the household. I was the connective tissue. I was the person who knew where everything was and when everything was due and who needed what and why. Gary knew this in a vague way and appreciated it in an equally vague way. He said things like, "I don't know how you keep track of everything," with a kind of admiring wonder, as if the keeping track were a natural talent like perfect pitch, rather than a choice I was making every single day. A choice that required labor and attention and the constant expenditure of mental energy that could have, in a different arrangement, gone toward other things. The children grew. Daniel graduated high school and went to Northwestern on a partial scholarship. Claire went to Ohio State and studied nursing. Andrew, our youngest, struggled more than the others. He had a learning difference that had taken us years to properly identify and address, and his path through high school and into community college, and eventually a trade certification, was harder and longer and more emotionally demanding than anything I had experienced with the older two. I was the one who managed Andrew's situation. I was the one who read the research and found the specialists and sat in the school meetings and drove him to tutors and fought with insurance companies and held him when he came home in tears because a day had been particularly brutal. Gary supported this in the way he supported most things, by agreeing it was important and trusting me to handle it. I do not want to make Gary sound like a ghost. He was not a ghost. But there was a way in which the emotional management of our family had become so entirely my responsibility that he had, over time, stopped developing the muscles for it. When Andrew was struggling, Gary's version of engagement was to ask me how Andrew was doing. Not Andrew. Me. I was the authority on the state of our family. I was the person who knew. Andrew graduated from his trade program in 2015 and got a job as an electrician in Columbus. The house was quiet for the first time in 29 years. I was 53 years old. I had not had a full-time job since 1992. I had freelanced occasionally, editing manuscripts from home when the kids were in school, and the window was narrow and the opportunity was there. But it had always been secondary, fitted around everything else, the last item to be scheduled and the first to be canceled. I remember very clearly the first morning after Andrew drove away in his truck with his boxes in the back. I stood in the kitchen with my coffee, and I heard the house, and the house said nothing back to me. No one needed lunch. No one needed a ride. No one needed anything. And I stood there in that silence, and I felt something I had not expected to feel, which was not relief and not sadness, but a kind of vertiginous blankness, like a person who has been carrying something heavy for so long that when the weight is removed, they do not feel lighter. They feel wrong, off balance, uncertain which way is up. I told Gary that evening that I was thinking about going back to work full-time. He looked up from his phone and said, "That sounds great, hun. What are you thinking?" And then his phone buzzed and he looked back down at it, and I sat across the table from him and waited for him to look up again, and he did not look up again for 4 minutes. I counted. I do not know why I counted. I simply did. I did not go back to work. Not then. What I did instead was what I had always done. I sublimated. I put the one away in a place where it would not trouble anyone, and I found ways to be useful in the house that no longer needed as much of me. I redecorated the living room. I organized the basement. I took on more freelance work quietly without making it a thing. I made very good dinners. I joined a book club at the library. I was fine. I was absolutely fine. Everyone who saw me thought I was fine. My friend Joyce did not think I was fine. Joyce Alderman had been my closest friend since our children were small, and in the same preschool in 1990, bonded first by proximity and schedule, and then by something more durable. A similar way of seeing things, a shared sense of humor, an ability to be honest with each other in the particular way that lifelong friends can be honest, which is to say completely and without cruelty. Joyce had divorced her husband in 2009, remarried happily in 2013, and had developed a sharp eye for women who were doing what she had done for too long, performing contentment. We had lunch in October, 2 months after Andrew left, at a restaurant near the library we both liked, and somewhere between the salad and the entree, Joyce put down her fork and said, "Miriam, how are you actually?" I said I was fine. She said, "No, not the house, how are you actually?" I opened my mouth and closed it again. And then something happened that I had not expected. I started to cry. Not gently, not with composure. I cried the way people cry when they have been not crying for a very long time, and something finally opens the door. I sat in that restaurant and cried into my napkin while Joyce put her hand on mine and said nothing, which was exactly the right thing. When I was finished, I felt hollowed out and strangely clean. "I don't know who I am," I said. It was the first time I had said it out loud. "I have been someone's mother and someone's wife for 30 years, and I don't know who I am when I'm not that." Joyce was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I know, that's why I asked." I went home that day and sat in the living room that I had redecorated, and I thought about what I had said. I don't know who I am. It was true. It was absolutely true. And the truth of it was not dramatic. It felt quiet and large, like a room you have walked past for years, and one day the door swings open and you see how much space is inside. Our 30th anniversary was in July. Gary wanted to go to a restaurant, a nice one, the kind of place they did not go to enough. I agreed because agreeing was what I did. He made the reservation. He chose the restaurant. It was very good, expensive, the kind of place with a leather menu and a sommelier who spoke quietly about the wine list. We sat across from each other, and Gary talked about work, and I listened and asked the right questions and was present in the way I had always been present. Attentive, receptive, entirely oriented toward him. Dessert came. Gary reached across the table and took my hand and said, 30 years, can you believe it? He smiled. It was a genuine smile, warm and a little wondering. He meant it. No, I said, and I meant something entirely different. That night, lying in bed, was when I could not find the decision I had made for myself. I lay there until 4 a.m, and the question I had asked myself, just one decision, just one, became the kind of question that will not let you sleep. Not because the answer is traumatic, but because the absence of an answer is. I got up at 4 and went to the kitchen and made tea. I sat at the table where I had sat 10,000 times making lists and plans for other people, and I took out a piece of paper and a pen, and I did something I had never done before. I made a list of things I wanted. Not things the house needed or the children needed or Gary needed. Things I wanted. For myself, without any reference to anyone else's schedule or preference or reaction. The list was slow to start. The first few minutes the pen just sat on the paper. It was embarrassing how long it took. And then things began to come, quietly at first and then faster, as if once the door opened the room was full after all. I wanted to go back to editing full-time. Not freelance, not fitted around everything else, full-time, with a desk and colleagues and a salary and the professional identity I had walked away from in 1992. I wanted to go to Portugal. I had wanted this for 20 years. It had come up twice in conversations about vacations, and both times we had gone somewhere Gary preferred. Portugal had never happened. I wanted a room in the house that was entirely mine. Not the kitchen, which everyone used. Not the bedroom, which was shared. A room with a desk and a bookshelf and a chair by a window. A room where I could close the door and work and read and be alone without it meaning something was wrong. I wanted to stop hosting Thanksgiving. I had hosted Thanksgiving for 27 years. I was done. I was completely done with Thanksgiving. And I wanted to have a conversation with Gary in which I told him all of this. Not a fight, not an ultimatum, a conversation. I sat at the kitchen table at 4:30 in the morning and looked at my list and felt two things simultaneously, terrified and more awake than I had been in years. I told Gary 3 days later, not at the kitchen table. I told him on a Sunday afternoon when we were sitting in the backyard with nothing particular happening, just the afternoon light and the two of us and the yard that I maintained and that he admired without being specific about what he admired. Gary, I said, I need to talk to you about something, and I need you to actually listen. He looked up. Something in my voice reached him, maybe the directness of it, which was not how I usually spoke. He put down the magazine he had been holding. Okay, he said. I'm listening. I told him about the list. Not item by item, but in the spirit of it. I told him that I had spent 30 years making myself small so that the household could function, and that I had done this willingly and even gladly for most of those years, but that Andrew leaving had shown me something I could not unlearn. that I had no idea who I was outside of the roles I performed, and that at 52 years old I was not willing to spend the next 30 years not knowing. Gary listened. He did not interrupt, which was new. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "I didn't know you felt that way." I said, "I know, that's part of what I'm telling you." He was quiet again. The neighbor's lawn mower started somewhere down the street. "I thought you were happy," he said. "I was for a lot of it," I said. "But happy and fulfilled are different things, Gary." And I have not been asking myself whether I was fulfilled, because I have been so busy making sure everyone else had what they needed. He looked at me across the patio table with an expression I could not quite read. Not defensive, not dismissive, but something more complicated. Something that might have been underneath everything else, grief. "Have I done that to you?" he asked. "Have I made you feel like your needs didn't matter?" The question was genuine. I could hear that. I thought about it honestly. "I don't think you made me do anything," I said. "I think we both stepped into roles that seemed natural, and I think I was so good at the role I was playing that neither of us noticed it was costing me something. And I think you didn't ask, Gary. I think for 30 years you didn't ask what I wanted because I was always already handling it." That landed. I watched it land. His face did something quiet and complicated, and then he said, "I'm sorry. I am genuinely sorry for that." It was not a grand moment. It was not a dramatic turning point with swelling music. It was two people sitting in a backyard on a Sunday afternoon, one of them finally saying what had been true for 30 years, and the other one finally hearing it. It was quiet. It was necessary. It was the beginning of something I did not yet have a name for. I started looking for jobs the following week. The publishing industry had changed considerably since 1992, but the core of the work had not changed, and the skills I had were real, and I had kept them sharp with my freelancing. I had a conversation with Joyce, who knew everyone in every professional circle in Cincinnati, and within 2 weeks she had introduced me to the editor-in-chief of a regional publishing house that was looking for a senior editor with exactly my background. The interview was on a Wednesday morning in September. I wore a blazer I had bought in 2016 for a funeral and had not worn since, and I drove downtown and parked and walked into an office building and rode the elevator and sat across from a woman named Patricia Sue, who was 44 years old and sharp and direct, and who asked me within the first 5 minutes what I was most proud of professionally, and gave me room to answer without filling the silence. I told her about a manuscript I had worked on in 1990, an academic history of labor movements in the Midwest that the author had nearly abandoned because he could not find the narrative spine, and how I had spent 3 months working with him to find it, going back to primary sources together, rereading the structure, discovering that the book was not about what he thought it was about, but about something truer and harder. And how the finished book had been published to strong reviews and had eventually been taught in graduate programs. I told her the story with a clarity and specificity that surprised me because I had not told it in years, had not thought of it as something to tell. Patricia Sue listened without looking at her phone once. She offered me the job 2 weeks later. $62,000 a year, full benefits, an office with a window. I accepted on the phone and then sat in my car in the library parking lot and called Joyce and cried. The good kind. The kind that is actually relief and not grief at all. I told Gary that evening. He was genuinely happy for me. He said, "That's wonderful, Miriam, I mean that." And I believed him. That was perhaps the most surprising thing, that when I stopped organizing my life entirely around his, he did not resent me. He adapted. We were both, I think, discovering that we did not know as much about each other as we had assumed. The room was next. In October, I told Gary that I wanted to convert the guest room into my study, a room with a door I could close. He said, "Of course," without any particular surprise, as if it were obvious, as if I had simply named a thing that had always been there waiting to be named. I painted it myself. A deep sage green that I had seen on a color swatch at the hardware store and immediately known was right. I moved my books in from where they had been dispersed across the house, and I arranged them the way I wanted them arranged, which was by a system that made sense only to me and that I did not explain to anyone. I put a chair in the corner by the window with a lamp beside it. I put a desk against the wall. I put nothing on the walls for 3 weeks while I decided what I wanted to look at, and then I went to an art fair on a Saturday morning alone and found a print by a local artist, abstract, green and blue and gold, and hung it above the desk where I would see it every time I looked up. The first evening I sat in that room alone, door closed, books around me, the sage-green walls holding the lamplight, I felt something I want to try to describe accurately. I felt like myself. Not like a wife or a mother or an editor or anyone's anything. Just the woman who was sitting in that chair in that room, reading, alone, complete. I booked Portugal in November. Not as a compromise, not as a negotiation. I told Gary I was going and asked if he wanted to come. He did, and I was glad, but the asking was mine and the going would have happened either way. We went in March, 10 days, staying in Lisbon and then driving up through the Douro Valley where the terraced vineyards step down to the river, and the light in the afternoon is the particular gold of a place that has been loved for 1,000 years. I stood on a terrace above the river on the 5th day and felt something open in my chest that I did not know had been closed. Gary stood beside me and said, "We should have done this years ago." "Yes," I said, "we should have." He heard it. He looked at me sideways and then back at the river and said quietly, "I'm sorry we didn't." He was not apologizing for Portugal. We both knew that. "Me too," I said, "but we're here now." Thanksgiving that year I did not host. I called Daniel and Claire in October and said that I would love to see them for the holiday, but that I was not hosting, and that anyone who wanted to organize something was welcome to do so. Daniel made a reservation at a restaurant in Chicago where he and his partner lived, and we flew up for the long weekend and had Thanksgiving at a table I had not set and ate food I had not cooked and cleaned up nothing, and I sat in the Uber on the way back to the hotel and thought, this is also allowed. I am allowed to want this. 6 months after our conversation in the backyard, Gary and I started seeing a couples therapist named Dr. Patricia Reeves, who had an office downtown, and who wore reading glasses on a chain, and who did not let either of us be comfortable for very long. It turned out Gary was lonely too. In a different way, for different reasons, but lonely. He had assumed that because the household ran and the children were okay, and I was fine that everything was fine, and he had therefore put his emotional energy almost entirely into work. He had not known that I was not fine. He had not thought to ask. We were, in Dr. Reeves' framing, two people who had gotten very good at parallel living and had mistaken the smoothness of that arrangement for intimacy. This recognition did not fix everything. Nothing fixes everything. But it opened a conversation that had been closed for 30 years. I have been at the publishing house for 2.5 years now. I have a staff of 3 junior editors and a list of books I am proud of and a professional life that is mine in a way that nothing else in my adult life has quite been. I am 55 years old and I go to work on Monday mornings with something I did not have before, which I can only describe as the feeling of being in the right place. Gary and I are different with each other. Not transformed, people do not transform overnight, but different. He asks more. He notices more. He called me at work last month just to tell me about something funny that had happened in a meeting, not because he needed anything, just to tell me. It was so ordinary a thing that I almost did not notice how extraordinary it was. Almost. We went back to Portugal in the fall. Just the two of us, 10 days, the Alentejo region this time, south and flat and ancient, cork forests and white villages, and a silence that was different from the silence of the house on the morning Andrew left. A silence that was chosen, that was restful, that belonged to no one and therefore to both of us. I want to tell you something about the woman I was on the morning of my 30th anniversary, lying in the dark looking at the ceiling. I want to tell you something true about her, something that is not cruel and is not sentimental. She was a good woman. She had loved her family with genuine devotion and had given them real things, stability, attention, the daily and unremarkable gift of a person who shows up completely. None of that was nothing. None of that was a mistake. But she had confused service with identity. She had made herself so useful that she had forgotten she was something other than useful. She had given so much attention outward that she had lost the habit of turning it inward, and the inward attention is not selfish. It is necessary. It is the thing that keeps you whole. It is the ground you stand on when everything else shifts. And she had let that ground erode, slowly, over 30 years, one small daily subordination at a time, until the morning of her anniversary when she lay in the dark and tried to find herself and could not. I found her. That is what I want to tell you. I found her. Not all at once, this is not that kind of story. But piece by piece, in a sage green room and a job with a window and a terrace above the Douro River and a Thanksgiving I did not cook. I found her in the list I made at 4 in the morning and in the conversation in the backyard, and in the session with Dr. Reeves when I said something out loud that I had known for years and could not quite say, and Gary heard it and said, "I hear you." I find her every morning when I get in my car and drive to work, alone, radio on, accountable to no schedule but mine for 38 minutes in each direction. She was there the whole time. She just needed someone to ask. My name is Miriam Ellen Forsythe. I am 55 years old. I have been married for 32 years to a man who is learning, slowly and genuinely, to see me. I have 3 children who are launched and loved and occasionally call just to talk. I have a job I earned, a room that is mine, a friendship with Joyce that has survived 30 years and several kinds of weather. I have been to Portugal twice, and I am going to the Azores in the spring. And I have a list, not the one from 4 in the morning. That one did its work and I do not need it anymore. A different kind of list. One I add to and take from as I go. A list of what I want, what I need, what I am still learning to ask for and still learning to receive. It is not a finished document. It is a living one. I add to it every time I remember that I am also someone. Every time I close the door to my green room. Every time I get in the car alone with the radio on. Every time Gary asks what I need instead of waiting for me to manage without being asked. The ceiling is still the same ceiling, but I am not the same woman who lay looking at it. And that, finally, is everything.